We'll get started. I want to welcome everybody for being with us today. I know people are in some ways enjoying these Zoom calls, but probably getting a little bit fatigued as well. But I think it's a great way to have participation. I think sometimes you're able to actually get more. I just want to let everybody know that we are recording that. We typically do record our events. There are a lot of people that tell me, geez, I'd like to be there, or and they can't, or they say, geez, I really enjoyed that, but I missed a few of the parts. So we find it really useful to record these, and that will be made available probably a few days afterwards or within the week. We'll send that out with probably just a brief survey too. We typically try to do this as an annual event. It's just a great way to see what's going on a little bit more locally within our county. And so I think this year in particular, we have a couple different factors. One, we have a new administrator, Mark Luberda, whom you will meet shortly. So I think it's good just to be able to, for those of you who haven't had a chance yet to meet him, to be able to kind of get a sense from him how he's doing and his background and those types of things. And then obviously with this crisis that we've all been dealing with, I think particularly interesting to see what's happening, from a county perspective, from an economic perspective, and even we're hoping to have our county sheriff plug in toward the back of the event here too, and just to hear how things are being impacted with that. Certainly 2020 will go down, hopefully not as an infamous year, but definitely a historic year. And I know it's been a lot of challenges that people are dealing with. We've literally been probably interacting with hundreds of different businesses throughout the last 2 or 3 months, just trying to connect them with information and resources. And we're anticipating that going forward, as people continue to open up and readjust their plans, that we will be also working with them. We've teamed up with our chambers and visitors bureaus as well, and kind of been in touch with them to work on different things and just keep in touch so that we know what's going on with our communities. So without too much other introduction, I'd really like to first introduce our first speaker, Mark Luberda. Again, just started his job earlier this year, and what a time to start a new position. But we're really happy to have Mark here with us. He lives in the county. He's been in the county a resident at least, I think, probably 20 years. Family has gone through the school district, lives in Williams Bay, so really has a good perspective of the county, and he'll talk a little bit more about his experience, but has a lot of great experience in the region. So with that, I'd like to have you join us, Mark. If you can just, we'll unmute your let's see.
How's that?
There you go. Great.
Okay. Well, thank you, Derek, for the introduction. Hello and good morning, everyone. I am Mark Luberda, the new Walworth County Administrator. I'd like to thank Waseda for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. I wish it could be in person. It's an unfortunate reality that this meeting, like so many others, has to transition to a remote or virtual experience. But we'll work through that, and I'll try to do my best to give you some understanding of the current state of the county. I'll go beyond providing sort of a simple static snapshot of the county today, and we'll talk some about where the county is going, because I think our current state includes that sense of motion and direction and momentum, as well as looking at the immediate arena and circumstances in which we find ourselves today. The pandemic obviously presents an entirely new reality for the county. So the state of the county cannot be addressed without really gazing somewhat into the future, given these unique circumstances. Because of that, I will probably be a little broader today and maybe a little less data-driven than my predecessor, Dave Brettel, was in past years, or even as I might elect to be in future years if I'm invited back. Before getting into all of that, however, Derek asked me to provide you a more extensive background of myself, being the new guy. Although I only started this position in Walworth County in late January, I've been a resident of the county for around 15 years. Derek gave me a couple extra years there in the introduction. Before that, though, I am a product of the Midwest. I've only been a Wisconsinite since about 1992, so not quite 30 years. I was raised in Illinois and Indiana suburbs on the far south side of Chicago. That led me to Indiana University in Bloomington, from where I got both undergraduate and graduate degrees in public administration, with concentrations in both urban management and public finance. After grad school, I was pretty much willing to move anywhere, you know, young and not tied down. And so at the time that sort of meant to me Seattle or Boston or San Diego. But I ended up in Des Moines, Iowa, which is a lot closer to the middle of nowhere than it is anywhere. But nonetheless, it was a great job that let me begin to learn and practice sort of the public sector budgeting and public sector program evaluation. And that experience landed me my first opportunity in Wisconsin, which was as the director of the Office of Management and Budget for Kenosha County. After some reorganization there, I became their director of administration, overseeing finance, human resources, IT, purchasing, all those administrative departments. And that position led me to become town administrator in Caledonia. If you don't know Caledonia, that's basically everything between the city of Racine and Mount Pleasant and the city of Milwaukee. After a brief year in the private sector, during which I moved to Williams Bay, I became director of administration for the city of Franklin. And I stayed in that role as their chief administrative officer for nearly 14 years until coming here earlier this year. So that gives me around 35 years experience evaluating local government services and preparing for local governments. And I've worked at the town, city, and county levels in Wisconsin. So I'm very excited to be given the opportunity to sort of to bring that experience to my home county. In this profession, it is pretty common for an individual to have to move communities when they get a new job. Well, the youngest of my 4 children was in kindergarten when we moved to Williams Bay, and he just finished his second year at the school at UW-Madison. Okay, well, it wasn't really at UW-Madison because, as you know, everybody got sort of sent home. But so I have been around the community for quite a while. Derek, that's probably more than enough about my background than I think people need. So what you really want to hear about is Walworth County. So why don't I transition to that?
Sure.
So what is the state of Walworth County? When the state of the entire world is so unusual right now, it's reasonable to say that the world has never experienced anything like this pandemic in our lifetime. And coming into the pandemic, Walworth County was in the same strong position you were used to hearing about every year from Dave Brettel. Fund balances remained strong, and they were bolstered by the end of 2019, reporting a net surplus. That year-end auditor's report is actually going to our finance committee at its next meeting, and it will be a very favorable report. The county continues to fund major infrastructure from within the current operating budget. It continues not to have any debt. And as such, we remain in a limited sort of public sector status in Wisconsin, with Moody's giving us a AAA rating. In addition to a lot of meet and greets and introducing myself to various town and village and city boards and learning Walworth County's existing policies and procedures, I anticipated using these first 4 or 5 months in part to beginning to understand and address the 2 main impending issues that were presented to me during the interview process for this position. So let me address those briefly first, since they were also 2 of the challenges that were presented as upcoming to you last year by Dave Brettel in the State of the County address that he provided. The first of those issues is addressing the future of the Lakeland Healthcare Center, the county's nursing home. The county board has taken the initial steps to right that ship by downsizing the facility from a 120-bed facility to a 90-bed facility. And this was the first step in right-sizing the nursing home to be better in line not only with our budget, but with population and nursing home demand estimates. Projections are that the steps taken so far, including those at a committee meeting or at the county board last night, will be able to be annualized into our 2021 budget at levels that meet the ongoing operational and fiscal needs. At the same time, we've begun to undertake, in conjunction with an experienced consultant, a review of what the appropriate potential use for the currently unused space is by vacating that extra space of 30 of the beds. At the last round of our county committee meetings, the Health and Human Services Committee heard an overview of a market analysis for a variety of senior-based residential housing options or strategies. That work will continue as we move into the 2021 budget development. In the meantime, we have a new nursing home administrator who comes to us with lots of experience. We recently received a state evaluation with 0 deficiencies, and that's very hard to do when the state comes in, gives you a review. To get 0 deficiencies just doesn't happen much. And we've taken some preemptive steps and made minor modifications to turn that currently unused unit into a separate negative pressure space that we can use as an isolation facility should the nursing home experience a COVID outbreak. So I think the status of the nursing home itself is moving very well into our future, addressing what was a critical issue last year. The second issue identified as an upcoming challenge is that of a pending large communications project. This addresses the entire communications backbone of the sheriff, his office, including other organizations that piggyback off that structure and that communications network. The project is still in the concept stage and not yet in the design and development phase. The city had contracted with a second consultant to develop and evaluate options. Given the potential magnitude of the cost, which is upward of $25 million, it was appropriate to get a second opinion and a second sort of analytical review of the technology options available. Why this was identified last year as a challenge and remains an impending challenge is that the county worked very hard over much of the last decade to eliminate debt. Major capital improvements, such as the new Health and Human Services building, were paid for from cash reserves and did not require the county to take on additional debt. This project has been estimated in the area, as I said, $25 million, which exceeds related and available reserves for a capital project of that nature. Nonetheless, it's a critical public safety infrastructure, and the 2020 budget anticipates borrowing in 2023 for the back end of that project. So I do think our status as this year's budget developed by my predecessor anticipates will potentially involve moving back into having to acquire debt at some point. Still very low levels overall compared to counties throughout Wisconsin. So if I started by noting that the county is currently overall very much where it expected to be, so what has the pandemic changed? I mean, the county was very much on plan, operating full speed ahead. We had a solid 2020 fiscal plan and years of stability. So what has the pandemic changed? Well, it's fair to say that it has set us back at least by a few months. Excuse me. Lots of resources have been diverted to address COVID-19 related issues. We've had to manage our employees differently. We've had to find new ways to manage facilities and operations so the business of the county could continue to move forward. We never closed the county's government center like a number of counties throughout the state did, but projects that were expected to initiate or ramp up have been on hold. And I'll be honest, what I planned as my first sort of 100-day plan has not gone quite as planned. There have been a few distractions, to say the least. Since early March, we've been reacting and reacting and reacting to the state and federal government, who've been the driving influences in our efforts. Every time they passed a law or an executive order, it required us to take a new tack or adopt a new policy. On top of that, we tried very hard to anticipate what was next so that we could be prepared. For example, I would have to give my Health and Human Services Department and my Office of Public Health some real credit. Within half a business day of the state Supreme Court's decision to overturn Safer at Home, HHS issued an approximately 38-page document providing the community and a broad range of business and nonprofit enterprises guidance on how to best consider operating with COVID-19 in the community and Safer at Home repeal. So those are the kind of efforts we tried to do to be prepared, despite most of our efforts having to be reactionary to the actions of the state and federal government. We will continue to do those sort of day-to-day things to the best of our ability, and we'll continue to react to state and federal government actions. But what does this all mean for the state of the county and for the county moving forward? Well, I would love to walk in as the new guy and tell you everything in the future is rosy, but that's probably too optimistic. But since I am an optimist, I can tell you that I would rather be us, Walworth County, than pretty much the rest of the state. That still maybe sounds a little too dire or a little too drastic, so let me explain. Based upon the federal government actions and prognostications, just about every state jumped into the same flattened curve strategy that Wisconsin followed. One could argue that flattening the curve sucked the life out of much of the economy. Well, a big part of that economy provides sales tax revenue that is a major component of the county's budget. Without any doubt, that revenue is severely impacted. It's only now that we're beginning to receive and reporting first quarter data and first quarter sales tax revenue. That'll go to the next finance committee meeting. But through March, sales tax was not yet really heavily impacted. I mean, at that point, toilet paper was only starting to become rare. So, you know, the economy was still chugging along into March. Safer at Home and its far-reaching impact on the economy was not yet really being felt. Nonetheless, early estimates by the state suggest that Walworth County could expect to receive as much as $1.4 million less than the prior year collections would suggest. And those were early estimates before additional months and months were added to the timeline in the process. That is a significant hit on our resources. Fortunately, the county has historically, consistently, conservatively budgeted sales tax revenues so that ongoing operations were not subject to its variances as much. As such, a significant chunk of that shortfall was going to have the effect of reducing our eventual year-end surpluses instead of actually reducing dollars that were essential to ongoing operations. So it provides a perfect example of why you conservatively budget what is an entirely uncontrollable revenue source. At the same time that was happening, the federal government's answer to the significant slowdown in the economy, with many sectors dramatically impacted and unemployment soaring, their reaction was to pour money into certain sectors. For example, hang on, my computer is about to shut itself off. There you go, sorry about that. For example, this year the county will receive double the transit aid to support the Walco Shared Ride program. The nursing home has received substantial additional support to offset added costs associated with combating and holding back COVID-19. And a number of other social services have been provided further funding as well. Public health has also been provided significant funding toward expanding their efforts toward contact tracing related to COVID-19. The largest of these grants is clearly the governor's Road to Recovery and the local government aspect of that, where the governor has pledged $200 million to local governments statewide. Walworth County's share of that is nearly 1.7 million. Now, the funding comes with more strings attached than you can imagine, as far as we can tell so far, because we're still waiting for the State Department of Revenue to issue guidance on what the funding can be used for. Nonetheless, there's money that's there and it's promised to be ours, but exactly what we can use it for is unclear. And at the end of the year, anything unused is taken back and it goes away. So based upon significant limited information we've received, there will be significant strains. It absolutely will not be able to be used, however, to offset lost revenue, such as the significant loss in sales taxes. So the end result of all that, of all our sort of unusual expenses out and all of these new unusual revenues in, is that as for the state of Walworth County, that I think 2020 will finish just fine from a fiscal perspective. I do not expect any large deficit or necessarily any deficit at all for 2020, although the final impacts of the sales taxes do still give me some concern for how long it might drag on. As I said at the beginning, however, I think discussing the state of the county requires looking sort of into the future as well, not just for this year. And that is where I see the impacts of COVID-19 lingering. Nearly every single action of the state and federal government to this point expires at the end of the year. Only one of the new revenue sources provides any assistance or support beyond December 31st of 2020, and that's the transit money that I referenced, which is supposed to last maybe one additional year. So in many ways, however, that added revenue is for this year is one of the best examples and pitfalls of the long-term impacts of COVID-19 and the state and federal responses. If the state, through federal grants, is fully funding shared ride service for 2 years, what happens in year 3 when the revenue is sliced in half? All of a sudden, $600,000 hole appears right in the budget. Something somewhere is cut, or the shared ride programs becomes at risk itself. This is a new service, and it's a valued service, providing essential transit opportunities to many people that are in an underserved capacity right now. It gets people to jobs, to the doctor, to school, to stores. It provides a needed service to a population in need. And today, as we sit here, I'm unsure exactly what its status will be in 2022 if we've relied on the money that we had before because we've got extra grant dollars coming in. So if we rely on the new revenue supporting transit to fill a hole created by the loss of sales tax due to COVID now, what happens to the service when that revenue goes away? So let's stay in that sort of gloomy portion of the presentation for a while the sales tax and transit revenue examples are representative of the future in which we'll have to operate. The state and federal government are arguably both being slightly overindulgent this year as they are throwing money at COVID-19. But that money comes ultimately from you and me and from their operations. The federal government may print the money, but eventually it comes from us. So what that means for the county is that the next couple of the years are looking at probably what I would say is constrained. Evidence of this was released earlier this week. I think it was the Wheeler Report, which is a daily web-based reporting of the goings on in Madison. And it reported that the governor here, excuse me while I read from a sheet, the governor sent agencies budget directions for the 2021 through 2023 budget. Agencies were told not to request any additional general purpose revenue funded expenditures in either year of the upcoming biennial. Those requirements were also put on the segregated revenue funds and administrative operations for the DNR, DOT, so that's the transportation fund that supports our road programs, and even the lottery. Additionally, agencies should not seek any new positions from any source in budget requests. And the quote was, assume zero growth in GPR, which is those general purpose revenue appropriations in both years. He did provide an exemption for some entitlements and related assistance programs, but you can see very clearly that while they're providing money because of COVID, they've all recognized that they're going to have some of the same revenue constraints, and they're not going to be making any changes or growth in the next 2 years. So the state is looking to tighten its belt, while we, the county, are an agent of the state. We are the operational arm of the state for many of their operations. If transportation revenues are constrained, our ability to maintain roads and perform snow plowing on state roads could also be constrained. We are also the service delivery agency for many of the state's programs. These are programs that serve seniors, children in need, abused spouses, mental health clientele, victims, the courts. These programs are all likely to feel the constraints of the state and federal resource stagnation that is likely to come in the next few years. So that all could be easily perceived as sort of too much doom and gloom for me, but I was sort of a Boy Scout for too many years to think of it that way. For me, it's more like a call to be prepared. For the bottom line is that we are likely in a better position to face this uncertain future, if it's a future of constrained state and federal support, than any other local government. What I said near the beginning of this presentation remains the basic fact and is worth repeating. Coming into the pandemic, Walworth County was in the same strong position you were used to hearing about every year from Dave Brettel. Fund balances remained strong, and they were bolstered by the year end of 2019, where we again are going to be reporting a net surplus. The county continues to fund major infrastructure from within the current operating budget so far, and it's continued not to have any debt, and we continue to have a AAA rating from Moody's. Out of all the counties in Wisconsin, I think Walworth is probably in the best position to face this oncoming uncertainty. I've been here less than 5 months as administrator, but I can tell you that you have a smart, creative set of department heads who have the county's best interests at heart. And I have every expectation that the near-term future will present some serious challenges, but I also have every confidence that we are in a favorable position to address those challenges head on, and that we will be successful. So the state of Walworth County today is strong and stable, and that is what will carry us past the lingering impacts of COVID-19. So with that, I don't know, Derek, if you wanted to have a question session, but that is sort of what I would say is the state of the county.
Great, Mark. Thank you for giving your background and overview, your insights. I think that's helpful for everyone to know. We do have your email listed there, so I know if people had some specific questions, they could reach out to you. One thing I forgot to mention at the beginning is what we're going to do is try to take the questions at the end, and if people if you could just go, if you scroll down to the kind of bottom, there should be a thing that pops up where you can hit a chat. You'll see a chat. You could submit your questions there, and Joel from my office and I will be looking at those, and we'll try to address those toward the end. So that's how we'll work that. Also, just want to mention too, usually at the top, I think top right of the screen, there's a speaker view. If you're not seeing who's speaking, you can usually adjust that at the top. But yeah, thanks, Mark. If you'll stay on, then we'll open that up for questions at the end. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And what we'll do is we'll move to our next speaker here. So wanted to bring in, and we've done this as well, just kind of an economic view, kind of the state, region, and even a little bit of the county. And if any of you were at the event last year, you would have met Tom Walsh. Tom is an economist at the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development. Very knowledgeable, very eager to help. I've got his contact information listed there as well. So if you do have any questions after the fact, you could certainly follow up. I did ask Tom also to comment because he does specialize as well in labor market data. So want to have him look at his crystal ball, just like Mark did a little bit, and see what he thinks in terms of the labor situation. Let's see, Tom, are you on and unmuted? If you are, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Yeah, I am now unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, great.
All right, thank you. And I think in our new normal, I think a mic check is now one of the things we have to do and remember to do all the time. I think that's one of my bad habits, is that I never remember to hit that mute button. So I'm working on it. But anyways, thank you for having me. Like Derek mentioned, I'm a labor market economist for the Department of Workforce Development. And I'm actually going to start with a challenge. So my challenge for everyone is to go in and close at least one of the extra tabs you have open, and to minimize your email. I'm saying it because I'm the most guilty person in the world of it. That when we're on these webinars, sometimes we forget that sometimes we try and do 10 different things, and I'm not enough of a dynamic speaker to hold your attention. So I'm going to just try and start that challenge right now. And so now moving on a little bit more to my actual background. My undergraduate degrees are in economics and political science. So both are degrees that have a reputation for not leading to related jobs. But I'm an economist that works in the government, so I guess it worked out all right for me. I'm not sure how I did that, but yeah. And then professionally, I'm on my second tour of duty with the Department of Workforce Development. I got a job with DWD out of college and spent about 3 years as both a data analyst and as a economist. And then I spent 5 years working in higher education at Milwaukee Area Technical College. And now I'm back with DWD, and I've been in the labor market economist role for Southeastern Wisconsin for about 1 year and 3 months now. So a little bit of a windy road but I think it's been pretty good experience for what we're talking about right now. So if we go to the first slide. Actually, one more slide. I'm starting out here with our GDP, or gross domestic product, slide. And so I'll say that the first half of my presentation is really trying to make some sense of what we've seen and what to expect. And then I'm going to transition into a little bit about commuting, which really has nothing to do with our COVID situation, but I kind of like the idea of maybe splitting it up like half and half, with half being our kind of, let's just say, like a little bit of the doom and gloom, or a little bit of our crazy new normal, and then the other half of things that we would have been talking about even if this hadn't happened. So the gross domestic slide, or the gross domestic product, we already saw a decline in Q1, and that was really based on the shutdowns that occurred in mid-March, and the first preliminary number for Q1 GDP was negative 4.8%. What the next number is going to be is really a question, but what we know it is going to be a decline. So it's really not going to be an unexpected data point when it does finally come out, and we do see that we were declining in Q2, or between April and June. So go to the next slide. And as we're going through this really crazy situation, we're limited on available data, and we're limited on available timely data. So in labor market economics, most of our data sources are lagged, but we have the ability to look at trends and make some insights on what are happening. That's a little bit out the window right now because everything is changing so quickly. So one of the data points that we do have is unemployment insurance claims. So this first graph here is initial claims for unemployment insurance in the nation. And this is something that we jumped all the way up to 3.3 million. And then in 1 week, and then the next week we jumped up to about 6.6 million. Our most recent number is down to 1.9 million. which is good that it's declining, but as a reference point, the record high before COVID was under 700,000. So while it's good that we're declining, but we're still not really out of the woods in that we're still more than double what we had been seeing in the record high. Next slide, please, Joel. So this is the same data, but for Wisconsin, and looking at really the daily average. 3 reference points on this slide are the 2019 reference point, which is the lowest. I think it's a yellow, and then the 2009 daily average, and I use that reference point because that was our previous high that we have on record. And then finally, the previous high we had recorded for a single week prior to COVID. So as you can see, we jumped way beyond anything that the unemployment insurance system had ever seen. And this is an indicator of layoffs, and really this is the data showing what we all know about the shutdown and the amount of people getting laid off. The gray bar that I put on as an additional reference was the reopen date, or the Supreme Court date. We saw a small increase in the decline, the rate of decline, but it really has flattened out. And over the last almost a month now, we've kind of been flat right around our 2009 daily, or our 2009 average. So similar to the graph before this, it's good to see the decline, which is an indicator that things are getting a little bit more back to normal, or as normal as it can be. But I caution a little bit just because of how high that peak was, and so it's still not really like a decline is good, but it's still worth noting that we're around our same average as we had in 2009, which was our last recession. So we go to the next slide. So while initial claims are an indicator of layoffs, continued claims are an indicator of people starting to get rehired. So I have the southeastern Wisconsin workforce development area, or the 3-county Kenosha, Racine, Walworth, and looking at the raw number of continued claim trends over the course of this year. So this is 2020 up to our most recent week. And so just like the initial claims, we're seeing a peak in the continued claims. Good sign is that they are starting to come down, but just like the other data points, they still are at high points. And this is one to watch as people start to rehire, and it'll give us some insight onto the pace in which businesses are bringing employees back. So if we go to the next slide. So yeah, just trying to wrap this up into really more points on what it actually means. We're going forward, as we are starting to see improvements, some of the things that could threaten a recovery would be like, first of all, the continued spread, or any kind of a second round that jumps up. And the next point would be like any supply chain or customer demand issues. So largely what's going on in our local area is connected to other parts of the world. So if other parts of the world are being shut down, or if other parts of the world are having reluctance to be buying or to be producing, it would have an impact in our local area. The next point would be how much our local consumers are willing to spend, or how much reluctance there is to get back out in the economy and get back out and spending. And then finally, the one that is probably the biggest threat, or I should say the second biggest threat, I think the second round is the biggest threat. But this final point, continued, would be the temporary shutdowns leading to permanent closures. So something to watch is how many of these businesses that shut down or laid off workers are remaining or are unable to open their doors or don't bring back the staff that they had to lay off during our pandemic. So we go to the next slide. So going forward, with everything we have in this crazy new normal, which I think that's going to be the phrase that we're going to be hearing a lot of, expect to see continued social distancing. And I think this goes back to the point on the previous slide, with the second round being as much of a threat as it is, or any kind of a second outbreak. I think for the strength of the economy, it is really important to have an eye on continuing to be on continued precautions and continuing to make sure this is a priority, while also being able to produce and meet customer demands and to be, for lack of a better term, to be making money. Second would be along the lines of that second round, watching the cases and watching the hospital capacity, and just making sure that our local area and the state is able to handle any outbreak that may occur, or that we watch to see that as an indicator that something might be coming. And then PPE, or personal protective equipment, is an acronym that really wasn't on my radar up until 3 months ago. But I think this is going to be a continued need, and it's going to be something that is going to stick with us for a little while to come in trying to make sure that we have an adequate supply of PPE. Just watching a lot of the points on trying to get us to a restart, PPE was one of the biggest limitations, or one of the biggest concerns, is that our hospitals and workers that really need the protection, we're having trouble having enough protective equipment. So I think this will go forward. And then the final 2 points, really kind of, I think this point on business practices is pretty straightforward, but even though we have a reopened economy, don't expect things to be exactly the same. And again, you can wrap that up in the new normal blanket term. But I think for the foreseeable future, things like having an event like this on a Zoom call, or having more distancing practices in place, or possibly capacity concerns at like hardware stores, is going to be part of our future. And then finally, the point on face masks. I put this in here because I think this is one that is pretty tough to accept, because if you're like me, you probably don't like wearing a face mask. And I can say that I definitely don't, but the more research I've done and the more studies I've seen on it, it does have a really important economic impact. And it can be really effective when used with social distancing strategies. So this is one where I never thought I'd be talking about this like I mentioned, when I got my economics and my political science degree. I never thought that I'd be talking about PPE, hospital capacities, and face masks, but there is a very direct economic connection to doing everything we can do to make sure we don't get that second round, or to make sure we minimize any kind of a second outbreak. So I do think it's worth reviewing, or worth looking at different business strategies and looking at the best practices on how face masks can help. And I think it's again, like me, it's almost, you almost want to be skeptical of it, just because it's really not comfortable, and it looks kind of weird when you're out in the world and you see people with their faces covered. But it is an important point, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about it. And before we go on to switching gears, I do want to maybe try to wrap up this doom and gloom portion of the presentation with a little bit of a silver lining. So I do think there's some positives that will come out of this. And I think the best way to summarize it is the way that we're having to leverage technology. So I feel like we accelerated the pace that we're using technology and I think that's going to lead to some very positive things for workers and some things that really help businesses with recruitment and retention. One of the things I would talk about in presentations before this all happened was about talent attraction. And so I think there's things that we've learned with technology that's really going to help attract talent and help retain talent and really to get on some of those things that are positive for both the worker and the business. So we go to the next slide. And just to summarize it, I clipped out a slide that I've used well before this all, but I think it's more relevant in our immediate future and our long-term future going forward, is just the idea that workers need to be very adaptable. And so if you are looking at hiring as an employer, or if you are looking to get a job, one of the things that is really important is that you are able to adapt and learn, because as we're talking about our new normal is really evolving, and as a worker you have to be able to kind of roll with the punches a little bit, and also to be able to really have the common sense to adapt with the business. And so I think this is a really important point, just to kind of get on that idea of soft skills, and within our uncertain future, I think the soft skills become even more important, even though they were really important before, but it's more essential now. Okay, so the next slide. So yeah, this is the next portion of the presentation is on commuting, and I'm not trying to make any kind of like a smooth transition from this COVID to the commuting portion. So I like I mentioned at the top, this is something that Joel had asked me about, and it's something that would have been a topic prior to this, and I'm hopefully it's kind of helpful to do part COVID and then part things that are more like outside of that doom and gloom situation. So the first slide here is showing net commuting for Walworth County. So in the middle, there's about 32,000 people that live and work in Walworth County. So this is by far the biggest chunk. And so this is so this is pretty straightforward. The other two are the people that commute into Walworth County, and then the people that live in Walworth County but go to take jobs in other areas. And so overall, there's a net of about 8,000 workers that there's about a net loss of 8,000 workers of people that are in Walworth County that go somewhere else. So I'm not really making an assessment on whether this is a good or a bad thing. So the kind of pros and cons of it, the con or the way it could be a negative is if you're looking at possibly people that could be working in Walworth County businesses but are going to work in businesses in other counties. The positive end of it is that these are residents that are going out and getting income in other counties, but they're choosing to live in Walworth County, and they're spending their money in their day-to-day lives, or they're buying houses in Walworth County. So really, again, I'm not making an assessment on good versus bad. I think anytime we see a negative number, we immediately jump to just the negative parts of it, but there's definitely some pros and cons on both sides of it. So going to the next slide. So a little bit more on these are the in commuters. So these are where workers reside. And I will use this slide and the next slide as an opportunity to highlight one of the products that the Department of Workforce Development has put out among our economists is called the county profiles. So we have a standard template for all 72 counties with a variety of different data points, but then each of them has a unique narrative for that specific county. So we do it about every 2 years. We released them like last winter, I believe. And so I will use this slide as a point to highlight it. So if you go to our website at wisconomy.com, you can find the county profiles. And I do think it's a good starting point to just get a good overview of Walworth County, or really any county in the state. So this is just showing where workers in Walworth County live. So just like the last slide, the majority live and work in Walworth County. But then there's also a mix of workers coming in from the surrounding area. And I guess it's not too surprising that everything in the top 5 are the adjacent counties that share a border with Walworth. So going on to the next slide. So this next slide is on the out commuters. So this is looking at those residents that go and work somewhere else. Like I mentioned, the positive end of this is that these workers go and work somewhere else and bring their income into Walworth County. But yeah, there also is the opportunity that for retention, or thinking of possible ways to keep these people in the county. So it's similar that every county, or actually all but one county on this list, shares a border. There also is a good chunk of Walworth County residents that make it into Milwaukee County. And I guess some of that is just a numbers thing. There is, with Milwaukee County being the largest job center, naturally there are going to be opportunities there that people could pursue. So moving on to the next slide. So I broke down a little bit more detail about the out commuters. So again, these are the people that live in Walworth but choose to work somewhere else, or are working in other places for a variety of reasons. So the top one on this list is a production occupations. This list is a little bit of function of just there being more production workers than installation and maintenance repair workers. But I think it's still some good information about what people are doing, and looking at the list of what they do, what they're doing outside of Walworth County. So going on to the next slide. I think this one is maybe a little bit more helpful. So this is looking at that net number that we had when I first started talking about commuting, with one small caveat that the data sources are slightly different. So if I gave you the full list, the numbers wouldn't match up exactly, but they're close, and the insights we're going to draw for them are I think are pretty valuable. So this is looking at an in and an out for the occupation types, and what I included are the top 5 highest out commuting, with the net out commuting. So just to kind of go through that, the first one on the list is the sales and related occupations. This is like, so there are about 640 people from outside of Walworth County that come to the county for this type of job. There's about 1,900 that live in Walworth County but travel to a different county for a sales and related occupation job. Just to highlight the bottom one on the list with the sales, or the healthcare practitioners and technical occupations. So I think this one's probably an example of a little bit of opportunity based and where the healthcare centers are. So by the nature of more of the major hospitals being in the surrounding area, you have healthcare practitioners that would have to go outside or you would expect more healthcare practitioners to go outside of the county for jobs. And again, to come back to that, how that could be a positive thing is that these are pretty good paying jobs that are bringing their income back. And so they're choosing to live in Walworth County, and maybe even having a longer commute time for these types of jobs. And so just to wrap this up, and not trying to say anything too revolutionary or try and give you like any kind of like a firm, like this is what it means. I'm just trying to give you some insights, and hopefully there's something in here that we can take back for whatever your specific roles are. But I do want to just go over a little bit of just higher level things about commuting. So I think when we talk about it from an economic development or a workforce planning standpoint, we do have some oversimplification of why people would commute. And we get this idea that the second you put a job in Walworth County, or fill in the blank for whatever county you're scheduling, that production worker is immediately going to quit their job in Racine County and take the new job in Walworth County. It's not necessarily that simple, just because a lot of people are going to stick with the stability. So I guess I say that with the warning that even as you bring more jobs into the county, you wouldn't expect it to be like this immediate fluid situation where all of your residents just drop what they're doing, put in their 2 weeks notice and come over. Some will, but it's usually a little more slowly than we perceive. And that's just one thing, working with different people and talking about commuting, where I've just noticed that, myself included, when you talk about it, you don't really think about the people end of it as much as you're thinking about the numbers, and you just think it's going to be this fluid change of where people are going to quit their jobs or switch jobs, when in reality it's a little stickier. Another point is that it's a job in Walworth County for certain residents, really can be further away than a job in a different county. So I think it seems kind of obvious when you say it out loud, but if someone's right on the county border, they're leaving the county for work could just be like a 5 or 10 minute commute. So there are some points where if you have a community that's really on the border, they're really not thinking too much about crossing that county border. It's really not on workers' minds. It's really not a major consideration for them. As much as we'd like to think that we have a huge amount of pride for our home counties, it's really like there's really no barrier to get across the county border. So it's really not like a strong draw. And again, I know it sounds fairly obvious when you say it out loud, but it's something when you're looking at the data can be kind of forgotten. And so like an example of that would be like Whitewater, which is right on the border. And so you could live in the Walworth County portion of Whitewater and work in the Jefferson County portion. But so that, I think that's just a good example. So really, if you go to the next slide, that really wraps up what I had. And the next slide is a little deceiving because we're not going to take questions now, but we'll be sticking around to take questions at the end. So yeah, thanks again for having me. Like one of the things I usually say when I give these kind of any kind of a presentation is that I just hope you take maybe like 2 things out of it that you go back to your desk and you remember or become applicable for your actual job. So hopefully I was able to hit that number. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the questions at the end.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom. Really appreciate the overview and some of your insights there. And while at the moment it seems like, geez, okay, we have enough labor, to draw from. I mean, that's a major issue for the future, just in terms of population growth. And so I think it is really important to look at the, commuting out, because, just because you maybe capture more people commuting out doesn't mean you'll have less commuting in. I mean, hopefully we would still continue to have that number commute in or greater. And if we can limit the ones commuting out, it just helps for the growth of our businesses down the line. So really appreciate that insight, Tom. And like you said, we'll take some questions at the end. So our next person I wanted to introduce is Kurt Picknell. He's our Walworth County Sheriff. And just thought it'd be good to hear from him about, just during this whole crisis, what's been happening. But they also have some programs too that people may not be aware of that are workforce related. And I thought might be able to hear just a few things from Kurt, and then we will take some questions at the end. And again, if you can put those into the chat, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So Kurt, are you on the line?
I am. Thank you, Derek.
Okay, great. Well, I'll let you take it from here, and thanks for being with us.
Hey, welcome, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invite. With that, I'm going to just run down some of the operational things that have been going on at the Sheriff's Office throughout the county, and then in coordination with other agencies in the area. So I'll just start off with, in addition to my responsibilities as a sheriff, once a year I'm an instructor at the Wisconsin Law Enforcement Command College, which is a partnership between the University of Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Department of Justice. And I mention this because the topic I teach law enforcement executives is strategic planning and organizational change. And we've all been going through that quite a bit and quite dramatically over the last three months, if not more. So we're all on that journey with that discipline in mind. As a frame of reference for the Sheriff's Office here, I have 5 distinct operating divisions. One is patrol. It's the uniformed deputies in marked squad cars running 24 hours a day. My investigations division, which is the traditional detective bureau and also undercover drug unit. Next would be the 911 communications center and also emergency management, which is very busy these days when this pandemic spun up. The next is my corrections division, which is typically what you would consider the county jail, but also are the work release center and electronic monitoring for inmates. And we'll touch on a little more details of that in just a little bit. And then also support services. Support services is our central records, our civil process, our court services, our internal training, our IT, fleet management, and also a few things that connect with school resource officer assignments and other related items. So with that, as I said, three of the 5 divisions run 24 hours a day: patrol, patrol, communications, and corrections, with the other ones on call as needed. In addition to the operating divisions, we provide a lot of specialty teams: canines, dive team, SWAT team, crowd control team, traffic crash investigation team that can actually reconstruct traffic crashes, a drug unit, as I said, court security, countywide emergency management, digital forensic examination of cell phones, computers, and other computer-related items for investigations. And my most recent annual report is on the Walworth County website, so that would be 2019's annual report. So onto the topic that we're all talking about. We are planning, making additional changes and learning to live with and want to mitigate and recover from. In mid-March was the start of major changes for my operation, and they were quite significant. And the coordination occurred with Walworth County Public Health, the rest of county government, State Sheriff's Association, the National Sheriff's Association, the Police Executive Research Forum, and I actually was interviewed nationally on some of the things that we were doing here locally, and Wisconsin Emergency Management, local police departments, our district attorney, CDC, and also our circuit court judges, because we're coordinating a lot of different things that are my responsibilities as your county sheriff. So just to touch on a few things, I'm going to break it down by divisions. So in the patrol division, our equipment, our protective equipment, was certainly one of the first things we looked at, both for our deputies and also for vehicle decontamination. We also did a deeper dive into adjusting responses for calls and considering changes in shift lengths, duty cycles, and assisting smaller local police departments if the COVID-19 affected their staffing abilities. I note that in tracking some of the data from mid-March to now, domestic abuse, arrests, family disturbances, mental health calls, they've all increased, where at the same time vehicular traffic was lower, not as many vehicles on the road, less traffic crashes, less drunk driving, but they were still occurring. So they were down by about half. And we were recently interacting with local civil protests, and all of those were peaceful, and I'm very thankful for that. But a lot of planning going into those as contingencies. And in addition, assisting Milwaukee Police and Milwaukee Sheriff with some of my tactical deputies and equipment. So from the communications division side of the operation, the communications center became deliberately isolated due to the COVID-19. I say that because the dispatch center located at the sheriff's office, I wanted to make sure that I had a clear access point for entrance and exit for the communications officers alone. As and I see some head shaking, that we're all trying to distance and what we were doing and reduce the touch points of human interaction to keep my staff healthy and safe. So having those segregated paths from the exterior of the building into their work area, into the dispatch center, the communications center, and also restricting anybody from going in that communication center on an absolute need only to keep that center pristine and secure. Some of the significant things that we had from the communications center is that we were inundated with a lot of calls when the Safer at Home orders started coming in, and there were changes to them. And we coupled with Walworth County Public Health and also my social media, Facebook, and press releases to try and keep some of that as a clean source of information. Not to call the dispatch center for those questions, to keep it clear for true emergency 911 calls, but also there's a 211 call center that you can call for COVID-19 specific information. So aligning those calls and getting those routed correctly through public education took a while, but then it started to take hold. So that was a significant first approach at stabilizing some of the calls into the communications center. With that, our emergency management responsibility throughout the county is connected with our communications division. And that spun up very quickly, and that has been basically more than a full-time job right now for my emergency management lieutenant, John Ennis. He's coordinating all of the information, the equipment through Wisconsin Emergency Management. He's my point of contact for that, and also for all the municipalities in the area, whether it's the county, city, village, or town. And it extends beyond the police departments to local government, fire, and rescue. So as I said, that's ongoing, and we're also in direct coordination with our emergency management at the county level, again with public health. And you're going to see this theme over and over with my presentation to you, that we're on a daily contact and updates with public health. So we've been doing a lot of coordinating for the public testing as a part of the emergency management's function as well. And I know that we have another one planned locally coming up in Elkhorn. We've seen the Burlington one, and also up in Whitewater, but also for the testing that was done at Birdseye Foods. We're heavily involved in coordinating the logistics for that. So with that, moving on to my corrections division, again, which I said is the main jail, the work release, electronic monitoring area. I severely restricted new inmates coming in, and that's a coordinated and cooperative effort, both internally with my deputies, but also with local police departments. And the threshold at that time, and it's still in place, is if there's a threat to society from somebody based on your arrest, then they need to be processed into jail. But anything that you can cite, whether it's a civil forfeiture or if you're citing them for what would be a misdemeanor or a criminal violation that doesn't have a public threat or public danger nexus to it, that you're simply citing them and you're giving them a court date. And essentially, when we first started, it was more than 2 months out to see what we would be doing in coordination with the district attorney's office and the circuit court and the clerk of circuit courts for scheduling. So they were given court dates for those the allegations of the violations for which they were arrested. Having done that, severely restricting the entrance into the jail, we have severely reduced the amount One of the things that buoyed in the other direction, and it was unanticipated at first, but I had to recover from it, and we have the capacity for it with the offset, is the state prison system. The State Department of Corrections, they stopped accepting inmates into the state prison system of inmates that were sentenced to serve state prison time. So I currently have 20 inmates in my jail that are waiting to be transferred to the state prison system. And this is similar to all the other sheriffs in the state, and you'll see this arrangement throughout the United States, as well as everybody wanted to stop moving inmates, stop moving people. And you could see that within the nursing home setting as well. So there's a little bit of a connection that you're seeing within these. Everybody wanted to stop the movements and start stabilizing what they had. So with that, as I speak to you right now, I still have those state inmates that I'm holding for them until they will start accepting them. And they're slowly starting to accept some of these state inmates that should be serving state prison time right now, but they're still in local sheriff's custodies. One of the substantial moves that I made was our work release center, typically what you would consider our Huber dorm. The work release center back in March 20th, that was the final day. There was planning prior to that, but I completely shut down our work release center. Again, the same theme, moving inmates, having inmates move in and out of the work release area of my corrections division. I stopped that, and we had anybody that classified that could go out on electronic monitoring were put on electronic monitoring in the program, so we could monitor them that way with touch points along the way. And anybody that didn't classify, they were transferred back into the main jail to serve the rest of their sentence. So that function of my operation was completely shut down, again, for the preventative reasons of where this pandemic was originally thought to be going and where it's at right now. Currently, I don't have any plans on opening it up right now. It's really kind of a coordination of where we go as society opens back up and how things are looking. One of the other things within corrections is there are a lot of programs that we have, whether it's professional visits with attorneys. Those were still allowed, but there was a little bit more of a deliberate barrier so they could have those private confidential conversations. But anybody else that would be coming in for educational reasons, religious reasons, those were stopped, and they have not restarted yet. Extra cleaning assignments were established, and you could see that throughout our entire operation. So the cells, the squad cars internally within the building, a lot more touch point opportunities. We had more rigorous cleaning done, and that continues even to today. Staff going in and working in the jail, their temperatures are taken, and they also have protective masks that they're wearing. And when inmates are coming in, there's a battery of questions that are asked of them by our nursing staff, and also their temperatures are taken. And if anybody was arrested and they were symptomatic, we had procedures in place with Aurora and Mercy to be able to take them there first, call and take them there first so they could be evaluated before coming into the jail setting. We do have 24-hour nursing care here that was started in 2015 when I took over as sheriff. One of the crystallized moments of explaining that is later in the evening and overnight, there are some people that come in that are arrested and come into the jail that have some pretty chronic mental health or medical health concerns. So it was really an effort back then to move from a 16-hour nursing staff contract to 24 hours, and that has paid dividends throughout the years. So the nursing staff was really moved into the forefront of this, screening inmates when they're coming into the jail. A lot of housing assignments within the jail were changed, and we currently have what is referred to as a quarantine area, even if somebody is not symptomatic, before they are assigned further into housing units. We talked about the decontamination procedures that have been amplified, and a few notable items in tracking some of the entries from 2019, same time, which would be March 20th of this year, to current date, 2019 to 2020 to see what those overlap in numbers would be. We've had a spike in domestic abuse arrests compared to 2019. And we've been managing that with partnering with public health and also New Beginnings, which formerly was APFV, to try and message some of the outlets for help as people have been inside their homes for an extended period of time. So with that, we are experiencing family trouble calls, mental health calls, and domestics, as I touched on earlier. Moving on beyond that, my support services, there's a prisoner conveyance portion of support services, whether we're moving inmates between one county to another on warrants or writs to be present in court, because the court system essentially shut down in-person visiting and no jury trials. A lot of these things were postponed, so the trips were actually reduced, or if there were any court appearances that could be done by video, just like what we're having on a meeting platform today, those are continuing right now as well. So any videos that are allowed through the my jail, which has the video ability, and we've had it for a long time, other county jails, state prison systems, and feeding into our circuit courts has been utilized quite substantially. So with the prisoner transports also being down, and I touched on that. Our drug unit has been quite busy. One of the things that's unfortunate is you're seeing people with idle time as well. And there was a little bit of a nexus within the first stimulus check and some of the overdoses that we're seeing in the area. And this is not something that's just unique to Walworth County. Regionally and around the United States, that was something that was noted as well. Our warrant services, which are connected to the courts, were affected because some of the people that had warrants that were not a substantial risk to the community, they were actually given new court dates to report to the courts, to the court system when the courts opened up, and they're in the process of opening up. They actually started opening the court system up 2 days ago on Monday, and jury trials are suspected and are being planned for in July. So it's what I would refer to as a soft opening of our circuit court system and our local judicial center, our courthouse. So we're heavily involved in the planning of that as we move it back up with my court security deputies and my screening operation right in the front of the building, similar to what you would see if you're going through the airport. So a lot of the civil process that we have are really directly attributed to petitioners' court actions through the courts, whether it's an eviction, a subpoena for an appearance in court, or a sheriff's sale on a foreclosure. A lot of these items have been delayed, but now they're starting to pick back up for two reasons. One, the emergency orders and the Supreme Court orders came off on quite a few of these orders. And also the court cases are now starting to get processed within our local court system again. I'm open to a lot of questions. I suspect there might be some, and I really appreciate the time to be able to talk to you and the flexibility of listening to somebody ahead of me in their course of study and what they see for the area. As I said, the courthouse is returning to normal, and two things of note for us. We are an accredited agency, and I know that within the business industry, there are certain accreditations or ratings that are given to you. So I proudly tell you of the two that we have. One is the acronym is NCCHC, that's an accreditation through the National Commission on Correctional Healthcare. So we've had that for years, so that the healthcare portion of the custody and care of the inmates goes through a rigorous accreditation process over and over. And we are also a Wisconsin law enforcement accredited through the Wiley group. And there's only 3 sheriff's offices in the state of Wisconsin that have that accreditation designation. And I know that there's many other changes that have occurred throughout the county and specifically within my operation, but employee health remains paramount for them, their families, and for operational continuity. So with that, I'll pause if there's any questions Thank you, Derek.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kurt. I mean, I just want to express my gratitude, and I'm sure everyone on the call and in the community for, the vital services that you provide. And I think it was really interesting. I'm not sure if people realize how expansive, your services are. So I think, I know you could have probably got more detail, but I think you did a nice job there of just letting people know what you cover. But again, thank you for your service to help keep things going during this time. I know it's a challenge for everybody, but particularly for what you're doing. I guess at the moment, I would say we'll open this up too, and I just want to see. Let's see if there's anything particular for you at the moment, Kurt. I'm looking here. There's a few questions. Let's see, and Joel, jump in if I missed something here. But I know there's a number of people wanting to thank you as well, Kurt, for everything that you're doing for the, for being a first responder. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And one of the things that I always deliver to my staff is that the overwhelming majority, a high percentage of society supports us, understands what we do. We need to be held accountable like everybody else, but we earn your trust every day and every night. And I'm really proud of my staff and local public first responders, public safety in the area. We collaborate very well, and that's something that we all desire to do for the benefit of the community. I'm actually a Walworth County resident all of my life, and one of the things that you find, and I'll say this, and I think there's going to probably be a couple of heads nodding on this, is this area is very unique in that it has a lot of natural beauty, has a lot of natural resources. We're within a box or a square, if you will, of urban areas around us, all 4 points: Madison, Milwaukee, Chicago regional area, and Rockford, Beloit. And when you're in this area, you're influenced by it, but you don't feel it on a daily basis. So if you want to go into one of the cities, you can, and a short drive, you're coming right back out, which ties into the presentation that I heard right before I stepped on with mine. But one of the pieces that gives us such a highly desirable area are all those attributes, but also public safety is integral to that as well. And I take a lot of pride in delivering that.
Well, again, thank you, Kurt. We keep getting, messages about thanking you and your team for all that you're doing. So really appreciate that. And I do think, in terms of a economic development standpoint, which is, what we focus on at Waseda, but, definitely public safety it's a big factor for companies wanting to locate here and, looking at employees and things like that. So, it's great to know that we have such a really high quality team. And, I don't know how many are accredited, but, that was something I didn't realize. So that's interesting to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's see real quick here. Let me get to some of the first ones here. Question here. Will we have slides? Yes, we will have a copy of this that we'll provide with the recording. I think the next question here is for Mark. Mark, could you give any updates on the Lakeland school?
The school had to adapt just like every other school system did when Safer at Home took place and the separate order that closed the schools. But they jumped into the remote learning very aggressively. The teachers really took to it. We kept all of our teachers' aides to support them and help them develop programming with the special needs nature of the school. You can look at a larger school district like I think Williams Bay has, a handful of teachers' aides throughout the school. We have more teachers' aides than we do teachers, I believe, because there's so much support needed. We have, I think it was like 50 teachers' aides. But the school continued to provide services. We sent desks home to some families because the desk to the student represented the learning process. And so we did everything we could to make the educational process continue for those students, and the administrator there and the principal and the staff deserve all the credit. And we did have a graduation ceremony. We had 17 students graduate. I believe it was last Monday. It was done in the parking lot. All the students were in their cars and they did a parade around the parking lot. And there was a loudspeaker providing the presentation. So it was a really moving event, and you could see by the smiles on the kids' faces through their windows or out their sunroofs that they really got into and appreciated and got to experience it. And that probably ended, and then the school immediately started thinking about what's going to happen in the fall. So the school worked through it very well, I think, and I think they're, they have some tools and devices that maybe some schools don't, that may give them some advantage in ability to move into what will likely be still a slightly new arena for them come the fall. So I would say overall the school had a good year despite the circumstances.
That's great. Thank you for that information. Next question is for Tom, and I know we're getting close to the end here, so if people want to stick around, that's great. But Tom, the question is, and might be putting you on the spot, so I don't know, but do you have any sense of the unemployed in our county, what the breakdown of industries they worked in? So, people that are unemployed or maybe that got laid off, was it, hospitality, manufacturing, healthcare, across the board, or do you have any sense of that?
We don't have a good breakdown of the numbers, but in general terms, nothing was totally immune. And it really, the hardest hit areas, where as you'd expect, are people that have to either see customers face to face or be in production in a location that can't be remote. So the hospitalities and the restaurants, I think, are the first and most obvious, and they got hit really hard. Production workers as well, and depending on what you manufacture. So if it wasn't considered essential, that the manufacturing was hit pretty hard. And then I think one that is kind of surprising, but not when you think about it, was healthcare. So healthcare, if it wasn't directly related to an area that might be treating COVID patients, or if there was anything that was elective, was basically shut down. So there were a lot of layoffs in that area. And that's not an all-inclusive list, but that's just maybe it's just a few high-level points on it. And I wish I did have better data than I do, but I don't have great data on this one.
Yeah, I'm sure that may take some time to get in. I'm glad you brought up the healthcare, because I think you're right. I think it might be a surprise to people until they really think about it. But I know that our two healthcare systems have been hit hard, and I'm sure across the nation, really, because of not being able to do elective surgeries and all that. So, if there are any ways that people on the call can help support their hospitals and healthcare systems, I think they're going to need the help. Hopefully they'll be getting some state and federal, but I'm not sure that that's going to be enough. So, Tom, just one thing for you in terms of, I've heard people talking, okay, people are laid off and, because of some of the unemployment benefits, they may not want to come back to work, or maybe because they've been laid off for 2+ months. It gave them some time to think about, do they want to go back to that particular job, or do they want to, maybe switch careers or industries and that kind of thing. What are you hearing, in your realm there? Are you hearing anything like that? I know it's partly looking into a crystal ball, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'll answer it maybe a little higher level. So I guess if you just look at it from the two sides. So if you are if you are laid off, one of the reasons for not going to a different job or one of the reasons for kind of holding out would be that it would be to go back to what you've done before or what you've done in the past. One of the reasons to not really actively searching could be really because if you are getting your unemployment for the short term, you're able to spend more time with your family, you're able to spend more time around the house and take care of a lot of things that have really been kind of building up and have that kind of sense of something to do. In terms of the question about changing careers, so I think in some ways that could be a good thing if they are people that are trying to maybe further their education or further their training and think about something that's maybe a better fit for them. I think just again to cover a lot and to be in more of a high level and nothing too direct, if you are as an employer concerned about your employees coming back, from everything I've heard, engagement is a pretty big factor and just kind of keeping them in the loop on what to expect and what the plans are. And then whether you're whether you're trying to get back your existing employees or you're calling back your existing employees, or if you're trying to hire new employees, I think one of the really important selling points right now is the long-term benefits of whatever your field is, and by continuing your career and really how they could build up and what reasons they would want to be really working for you right now. And hopefully that gives some insight while also kind of dancing around the question, which I know I did.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Mark, for you, just a question, and I've heard this a lot too around the county, but in terms of testing and tracing and things like that, as we start to open up, and I mean, hopefully we realize that things are going to increase or the numbers will increase, but obviously the hope is that it doesn't spike out of control. But I know you and I had a conversation about some of the things that the county and the health department are doing to bring more testing sites or work with other neighboring communities and that. Can you just talk a little bit about that? I know Kurt mentioned that sounds like we'll be having a site in Elkhorn soon, but are there plans even after that? Because I think they typically run for 5 days or so like that. But just curious if you could comment a little bit on that, Mark.
Well, there's really two things, and one of them, follows up on what Kurt said. Those major testing sites are being coordinated through the state with the resources that they're moving around the state. And so you sort of have to get in line for them. And what we've been doing is as soon as we get a confirmed date, we get back in line and start pushing for another one. And this is primarily the EOC staff and the sheriff's employees doing that. So we've been smart in the sense that when you can serve multiple communities, I think the state's been more responsive. So we had the one in Burlington, and then we got right back in line for Whitewater. And as soon as we had that confirmed, we got back in line and started pushing for something more centralized. And it looks like we will be on board for something before the end of the month here, probably in Elkhorn at the fairgrounds. So I think that's important. And the other piece is what the state released, I think last week, and started talking about is some separate money that they've are making available to counties, significant funding to just really enhance contact tracking and contact tracing. Because when you find that case, it's then where do you go from there? Who can you inform from there to try and get ahead of any spreading that case you've identified through testing might cause. And so the county did look to accept the funding to take the lead here in the first two portions of that. There's a third layer of contact tracing once people are already identified and isolated, basically reaching out to them daily to make sure they're following it. We're going to leave that to the state's people, but take that point in identifying them and finding that path and through the contact tracing. So that will be ramping up as the money becomes available. They've told us it's there. They really haven't given us the the details and the mechanism to actually get the new bodies in place to do it. But I think that'll be a big effort that will be kicking in here probably following this next round of committee meetings and into July, and remain in place probably for the rest of the year.
Well, again, I want to thank you and the health department, all the work that you're doing as well, Mark, to keep things operating and keep everybody safe. So I hope you can relay that to all of your staff. I want to thank our speakers here for taking time to join us. We will make this presentation available in their contact, so I hope I didn't miss any questions, but if I did, I'm sure they'd be happy to, follow up with you on that. So again, thank you everybody, and good luck with the summer. I hope to be able to see people in person in the not too distant future. Thank you.